All right. Hello, everybody. I'd like to welcome you to this video lecture for AP Psychology, Unit 6, Module 26. As we look at learning, we're going to take a closer look today at the issue of classical conditioning. So, to get it all started today, we need to take some time to review the influences of Mr. Ivan Pavlov. As you know, and as we talked about in class and saw in the video in class on Monday, Ivan Pavlov did not set out to discover classical conditioning. He actually started off studying the digestive reflexes of dogs, but in the process stumbled upon this form of learning that is very important for us to understand. So we're going to break down the elements of classical conditioning today and show you some examples of how it's been used as well. I'm going to give you some alternate terms here to help you remember these elements of classical conditioning. And I think if you can remember these, it'll make you or help you kind of keep all of this straight. So first we want to remember that classical conditioning is, again, a form of association learning. When we associate a stimulus and a response. Now, if you can remember these alternate terms, you'll be in good shape. So when you hear the word stimulus, think of a cause. A stimulus is always going to cause something to happen. The response, again, would be the effect of that stimulus. So a response is a reaction or an effect that comes after the stimulus. So classical conditioning is cause and effect learning. Now, there are two types of stimuli or responses that you need to be able to distinguish. The first is conditioned. If we have a conditioned stimulus or a conditioned response, that means that was learned. In other words, it's not natural. It had to be taught and learned. It is conditioned. If we have an unconditioned stimulus or response, these are natural. They're naturally occurring. They're reflex type stimuli or responses. They do not have to be taught. A good example of this would be crying in infants or babies. You do not have to teach a baby how to cry. It is a natural, unconditioned response. When they are uncomfortable in whatever way, they are naturally going to show that by crying. So these natural conditions. All right. We want to, again, make sure that you can identify these 5 elements of classical conditioning. Now, we will have talked about some of these in class already, so today may be more of a review, but again, it can't hurt to be able to identify these things. The number one example that I think will help you keep all of these straight is that of Pavlov and his dogs. So this graphic right here will be very helpful in terms of understanding what exactly Pavlov did. Again, he stumbled upon this idea of conditioning as he noticed every time he got near his dogs with food, they began to drool. Now, some of that occurs naturally. But he also noticed that these dogs began to drool even when he did not have any food present. That is not natural. So he began to play around with this a little bit and used, in this case, a stimulus of a bell. In this case, the bell represents a neutral stimulus. That is, by itself, the bell does not cause anything to happen. It is neutral. If you go up to a dog and ring a bell in its face, it is not going to have any type of reaction, definitely not going to start drooling. So if you notice here, this bell is neutral. There is no salivation occurring from the dog. Now, if you go up to a hungry dog and show it some food, that dog is naturally going to have the reaction of salivating or drooling. This is naturally occurring, so it is unconditioned. This UCS here stands for unconditioned stimulus and unconditioned response. The food is naturally going to cause the dog to salivate. Now, what Pavlov did during conditioning is he began to pair these two things, the neutral stimulus, which is the bell, and the unconditioned stimulus, which is the food. He would ring the bell, then show the dog some food. The dog, of course, is going to have an unconditioned response of salivating, primarily because of the food at this point. But the more Pavlov did it, rang the bell, showed the food, the dog drooled. Bell, food, drool. Eventually, it got to that point where the dog learned that, hey, at the sound of this bell, it usually means food is on its way, so it would start the salivating process before the food even arrived. At this point, these things become conditioned stimuli and responses. Why conditioned? Because the dog has learned that the bell means food is coming. Up here, keep in mind the bell was neutral. The first time Pavlov rang the bell in front of the dog, there was no salivation. Down here, after conditioning, now when the bell is rung, the dog salivates. That is a conditioned reflex or a conditioned response. Okay? What I want to do next is just kind of break these components down a little more for you, give you some different ways of thinking about it. Okay, we'll start with the neutral stimulus. Like Pavlov's bell, these things do not by themselves cause any type of response or reaction. They are neutral. So it could be the bell ringing in the case of the dogs. It could be a color. For example, the color of my sweater. This is relatively a neutral color. I doubt it's causing any type of reaction or response in you. It's just a color. Okay. In the case of little Albert, which we'll talk more about here, when Watson showed him a furry object, in this case a rat, the rat was actually neutral for baby Albert. It had no response to it. Okay, so the neutral stimulus does not cause any kind of reaction. It is neutral. Now the unconditioned stimulus, remember unconditioned means unlearned or natural. Stimulus means cause, so an unconditioned stimulus is always going to cause some sort of natural reaction, a reflex. The food, if you show a hungry dog some food, that food is going to cause some kind of reaction. If I were to have an air horn and I blasted some air in your face, that is going to cause some kind of reaction, naturally. If you make a loud noise behind the head of an unsuspecting baby, that is going to cause some type of reaction. So these are natural causes. The unconditioned response is the response to that stimulus. So it's the reaction. It's the naturally occurring reflex. So in this case, with Pavlov, it is the salivation that occurred because of the food. It is natural. You do not have to teach a dog how to drool when there's food present. Same thing with your eyes blinking. If I were to spray an air horn in your face, you would, at a minimum, blink your eyes. That is natural. We don't have to teach that. Again, if you scare an unsuspecting baby with a loud noise, they are naturally going to have a startle reaction and start crying. So these naturally occurring reactions are the unconditioned responses. Now, once conditioning has occurred, keep in mind, we pair the neutral stimulus, the unconditioned stimulus, the unconditioned response, and we repeat that many times. What used to be neutral now becomes conditioned. In the case of Pavlov, that bell used to be neutral to the dog, but now it means something. The dog has learned. Remember, conditioned is learned. Stimulus is cause. The dog has learned that that bell now means that food is probably on its way. So at that moment, that neutral stimulus becomes a conditioned stimulus. Okay? The bell causing the dog to drool. The conditioned response is that response. In this case, it's the actual salivation, the drooling, because of the bell. That is not natural. The dog had to learn how to drool at the sound of the bell. The first time Pavlov showed the dog the bell, it did not drool. So once that learned response has occurred, we say it is now a conditioned response. The salivation because of the bell, not necessarily the food. Okay. Another classic example here is that of little Albert. It's important to kind of get a handle on what Watson did as well. We saw it in the video in class on Monday. Remember, Watson showed little Albert a rat, which for the 9-month-old baby was neutral. Didn't necessarily scare him. It's probably just figuring, hey, it's a rat. It's furry. It's moving. Big deal. Definitely no fear response. Okay. Then what Watson did, of course, was, unbeknownst to little Albert, make a loud noise behind his head, a gong type sound, and that, of course, naturally caused little Albert to react to fear response. So in this case, the loud noise was our unconditioned stimulus, and the fear response was our unconditioned response. Again, you do not have to teach a baby how to cry when they are scared. It's natural. So what Watson did was he paired these things together. He would show little Albert the rat, make the loud noise, little Albert would cry. Pardon me while the lights went off. They will automatically do that if you don't move around for a while. So anyways, back to the story here. Show the white rat, make the loud noise, little Albert cries. He did this about 8 or 9 times. Eventually, all that needed to occur was the sight of the white rat, and little Albert freaked out. He started crying. At that moment, that became a conditioned stimulus, the rat, and a conditioned response. Why? Because he didn't need the loud noise anymore. He learned, when I see that rat, that's not good. So he started crying before and without the loud noise. So at that moment, we say conditioning has occurred. All right. Hopefully this helps you get a handle on the idea of classical conditioning. We will do some more work with this in class tomorrow. Please take some time to go through the reading guide and fill in any components that were not covered in this video lecture. That way you're prepared for our next lesson. Thank you.